as of right now. And again, this is partially because what the hell else am I going to do? What else I would do would just be not writing, and that really can't happen. The way it works, just not to be too much in the weeds, but I have a publishing deal with this company here in Nashville with 3 of my other friends. Actually, Marty Fredrickson was my first co-write in the Nixons 20 years ago. And we started this company with 2 other friends. And, my publisher, they need songs. They need songs to go pitch to, fill in the blank. A lot of what I do is rock. So I still work quite a lot with, my first few cuts were Daughtry, Three Doors Down, Bowling for Soup, Jonas Brothers, but then did do country. I ended up having a hit song with Carrie Underwood. And then, but again, rock is still the sort of the bread and butter. I had a recent #1 song that I co-wrote with Shinedown. So in-person writing, yeah, I mean, like your gut is to say, oh, you got to be in the room so you can really see in someone's eyes and feel the song reverberate. But I mean, screw it. We're just doing what we got to do. And again, I'm busy as ever. Like I said, started that publishing company in the middle of COVID, had a #1 song with Shinedown in the middle of the pandemic. So, in some ways, I'm just rocking along.
How much does that dynamic differ from songwriting partners? I mean, is the process generally of kicking things back and forth, is it generally the same across the board?
The interesting thing is, mentioned the Nixons, that was my on-ramp to the music business, rock and roll band from Oklahoma. We get a record deal, tour everywhere. And then, dove into actual, songwriting as a, profession. And you really do have to learn to adapt. I just meant the names I just mentioned. I mean, walking into a room with 2 members of Three Doors Down or Shinedown, it's way different than walking in a room with Carrie Underwood. It just is different inherently by the nature of the human beings that are involved. And so, you do have to sort of adapt and be a little bit like, okay, I got to wear a different kind of hat today. Whereas with the Nixons, I found it interesting to come back to the Nixons 17 years after not even speaking to a couple of the guys and writing new music. It was really cool and really liberating and uniquely different than writing when you're trying to get a cut on an album by some artist maybe you just met for the first time. I told someone the other day that really writing the new batch of Nixon song was in some ways the most fun I've had writing in a while. I love what I do, but just like it was super, free feeling, like do whatever the hell you want to do.
Were there songs that came up over the years that you felt at the time would have been a good fit for the Nixons?
For sure. In fact, I just did something also during COVID because I was just, looking for stuff to do, but I released 2 little EPs, Zac Maloy solo EPs. And what they are basically, it's called Lead Singer Syndrome, Volume 1 and Volume 2. It's basically songs that I had written that didn't find homes that I loved. And so I just said, you know what? Screw it. I'm going to release this. And a couple of them, one of them is pretty heavy rock. The other one is more singer-songwriter. And there's a couple of those rock songs that I definitely remember thinking, this would be cool for the Nixons. And it's me singing the demo. So it almost sounds like it could have been a Nixon song. Having said all that, the way my life works as a songwriter is I go into situations with people that want to write with me, that want to collaborate with me. And in the case of the Nixons, I mean, the guys still want to collaborate with me, I hope still, but it's different, right? We're a band. So there's a different dynamic when Ricky, my bass player, says to me, man, I don't really like what you sang on the chorus there. It didn't seem to make sense. I don't take it, I take it very much in stride. I don't take it as like being disrespected as a songwriter. I'm like, okay, cool. Because I want everyone in the band to be happy and satisfied with the music. And it's just a little bit different in those other cases because you're working almost like towards a goal, whereas the Nixons were just writing because we're like, let's write some rock and roll music.
It was a directly collaborative process when the band got together and wrote music. Everybody it wasn't you just sort of bringing a song in from the outside. And
That's right. And that's what I mean. Like that is a lot of times that's what we do as professional songwriters. We come in with an idea. Hey, what do you think of this? This was more like, I'd get an email, and I loved getting them, like a bed of music from Ricky from his cabin in Utah. Ricky's the bass player. Jesse's the guitar player. Jesse then would send me a bed of music from his place. I would excitedly load it into my Pro Tools and sing, la, 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 come up with stuff, blah, blah, blah. Send it to John. He'd lay down some drums. In a lot of cases, John was great about, oh, dude, what if we go to halftime here? Well, that might dictate then what happens to the to the guitars and the bass. We're lucky John is also the drummer for Seether. So he sort of never went away from being, a rock and roll band dude, where the rest of us really did. We really kind of went off and did other things. So it was great to have John as a part of that creative process, especially having not done it in a long, long time.
You mentioned earlier that there was a point when you said not even speaking with some of the guys. Did things go so wrong that you just kind of had to kind of step away from them for a while?
Yes. Hell yes. Now, I mean, listen, here's the truth. There were some definite, sort of like bad vibes at the end of the Nixons when we split up in early 2000s. We basically formed in the early 90s and ended in the early 2000s, whatever those are called. Definitely, we all kind of it didn't end pretty, and so it took a while. People would say, I would get called and say, "Hey, come play this festival in Dallas, Texas, or Houston, where that's our home market, that part of the country." And I didn't, the first couple offers, I didn't even present them to the band because I knew I didn't want to have anything to do with that.
They were specifically asking for a reunion.
Exactly. Yeah. And so it just became this thing over time. Eventually a dude back in Oklahoma City, our hometown, basically called us all separately and said, "You guys are kind of being stupid. Just bury the hatchets. It's been years." We did great, epic phone call with each member of the band, one with the bass player who I had not really talked to in 20 years. We talked for an hour and a half, and it was great because we used to, stay up late listening to weird alien talk shows on late night radio, driving the van across America, so.
Are we talking like Art Bell?
There you go. That's who. So yeah, man. So it was fun, to sort of reconnect with these dudes that were brothers, in a sort of a previous life. And then the flip side to that is that we've all grown up a lot. You know what I mean? So it's a lot easier to just sort of not get your feelings hurt and not take things to heart and not be so precious about certain things. It's like, hey, this is just fun now. This is we're just having a good time releasing new music for the first time in forever, playing old music for the first time in forever.
What is that first conversation like when you haven't spoken to somebody that you were so close to for so long?
Well, it was a lot of, so what are you doing? Like, what's life? What is your life? Ricky, what are you doing in Utah? And
I'm not even following this guy on Facebook kind of situation.
That's right. And again, because there were certain things that went down that weren't happy, there were no hugs and maybe I'll see you again someday. It was just like, we were just done. Yeah. Suddenly we were done. We played a lot. The Nixons toured a lot. We played an average of 300 days a year for a good decade or so. And so the other part of it was that when people would say, "Oh, you must miss it," for the first 3, 4, 5 years, the answer was a resounding hell no. I don't miss it at all. I love that I still get to make music. I'm writing music with other people, and that's good enough. And then at a certain point, again, you feel like, well, wait a second. Am I never going to sing this song that was, maybe the most important song of my, career? Because those songs, the Nixon songs, were definitely my introduction into music, and working at a real studio for the first time, working with a legit producer for the first time, doing things that I now do with other younger artists.
Was there some degree of frustration in, you've got this big hit album, this big hit song in like 94, 95. I assume at some point you just sort of try to chase that success.
I will say that I'm pretty proud of the road we took, which is, and for for deeper dive Nixons fans, they'll kind of understand what I'm about to say. But, you know, the first album was very much young dudes, you know, in a van touring anywhere that they would let us come play. You know, we would play a pizza shop, you know, and then go play the record store the next afternoon before our gig, you know, in, you know, small town East Texas. And then, you know, there was this youthful rock and roll energy, smash guitars, light the stage on fire, very in your face rock and roll. Our biggest hit, as you know, as fate would have it, was not in your face rock and roll. It was more of a mid-tempo ballad, such as Life. But on the second and third album, I'm really proud of what we tried to do, which is, you know, we would try things. We would try, you know, a song in, you know, acoustic driven, bouncy, you know, 6/8, you know, or just try to think a little bit outside the box. And yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, I'm proud of us for that sort of that catalog of music that we created, again, that we left and we're, you know, I'm happy to say able to come back to. It's been refreshing, but no, we didn't do that. And again, you know, in some ways, I guess you could probably argue that maybe we should have more because we never quite had the success that the song Sister had. Our second album yielded a top 5 rock hit called Baton Rouge that is still one of our more popular ones, at least in the live set and stuff like that. So, you know, but again, Baton Rouge stylistically is completely 180 different than, you know, it's totally different than Sister it was. So yeah, we were able to sort of push those things. And I also will say that I've been able to sort of recreate that as a songwriter. I mean, I literally have had sad song by Carrie Underwood that was a hit that's about dying. And I've had really stupid songs that I wrote that ended up on a Blake Shelton album about getting some. I mean, it's, you know, so there all points in between can sort of be hit. And that's also because I'm lucky. I've gotten to work with some talented people. So if I walk into a room with some dude that's in a quirky mood that day, it might end up being a little bit of a quirky song.
The math or the dynamic changes once you do have that big hit. I mean, before that, you know, you can just be a bunch of dudes in their 20s in a band having fun. And then all of a sudden, especially like we're talking, you know, early to mid 90s. So like the machinery of the record labels that are behind you must just completely change the dynamic of being in a band.
Yeah, for sure. Labels, you know, it's that thing, you know, when you're younger, you think, you know, that's the goal, right? I'm going to get signed to a major label.
Going to be a rock star.
Yeah. And listen, we did it. And I'm very, very proud of us for getting to that point, being, you know, small town dude from Oklahoma, and you know, playing frat parties and sorority parties at OU. 4 years later, we're opening for Kiss at Madison Square Garden. So I'm proud of a lot of those things we did. And it does definitely change the way you sort of your point of view to the musical landscape. Labels, on the other hand, and unfortunately, I've seen this a lot more than I wish, but they can be a force of not good. You know, I've seen plenty of bands get signed, you know, massive bidding war, and finally label XYZ lands this band of the moment. And then I talk to the band a year later and they're still writing and the label's still waiting to hear if they've written their first single. And I just see the life being sucked out of these artists, that because a label is what it is. They have to make money. They spend a lot of money signing that band. You know, they beat out the other 4 labels that were interested in them. So they were careful. They were not going to take chances. So I get it. It's their business. It's their, you know, A&R guy that signed that band, that signed the Nixons. The Nixons go down, crash and burn. He's probably getting fired, you know? So I'm not blaming labels or A&R guys. It is their job, but there are definitely good ones out there and maybe not so good ones out there.
I'm assuming that in a lot of ways, once the band gets back together, there isn't that same sort of pressure. I assume that the Nixons in 2020, 2021 are not facing the same sort of pressure that they would have been in the mid 90s.
That's incredibly true. And also probably why it was so fun, you know, to do this new music, like to just be like, would be lying if I told you that I wouldn't be extremely, you know, happy if suddenly, you know, one of our songs from the EP was used in a movie and it charted on the rock charts. That'd be great. I you know, who wouldn't love that? but that is not what that's not what it's about anymore for the Nixons. It's about, unfortunately, it was going to be about going and having some fun touring. And even, this year, I remember September, October, my agent called and said, "Hey, we got offered this summer tour in 2021, fast forward to January 3rd, 4th, 5th, it got canceled, so it's all about that now. It's all about just getting out there, having some fun. I mentioned I've got a son to you that's at school at NYU. I got another kid in college in Boston. And so, I mean, my kids are gone. I'm ready to go out and rock again, so it's super bummer. But at the same time, as you said, yeah, there's no pressure, man. We're having fun. The new music was really, a blast to write, a blast to work on.
I was looking back at some of the blog posts on your site, which I think the past couple of years have been about a rate of one per year, it seems like. And a couple of years ago, you noted that your son was born on the day the Nixons began to break up, which I thought was a really interesting way of putting it, which, points to two things. I mean, one, the sort of the responsibilities of like growing up and maybe taking some of this stuff more seriously, but also began to break up implies to me that it was kind of a lengthy process.
Yeah, listen, I mean, it is sad, the way bands break up, the way it can end for bands, but probably God, it's in much the same way divorce, right? I mean, it's a separation that's not too dissimilar. And yeah, it was an interesting time. By the way, I need to do more blogs.
You got time, Zach. That's all I'm saying.
I'm gonna write one tonight, dude. No, so yeah, it was an interesting trajectory, that I will say that maybe even in that same blog, I mentioned how weirdly full circle it was to look over on the side of the stage and see my two teenage sons who had never seen me doing this, stage diving into the crowd at a festival in Houston and doing my best to, have a stiff neck the next day from banging my head. So in some ways it was full circle, but yeah, it's a tough thing. It's a tough thing when you're getting impassioned phone calls by band member, saying, "Look, if this doesn't go down this way, then I'm out," and meanwhile, my wife's getting ready to go into labor. You know what I mean? So it was an interesting trajectory, certainly to live through that. But then, as you pointed out, yeah, I mean, it was a sort of a, what's the Robert Frost, thing, it's
to pass diverging in the wood.
That was it, man. That was it for me. To be honest with you, it was a huge thing because I was able to say, yeah, you know what? I'm not going to go out on the road and be away from this kid, these then two kids. And I sort of was able to create a career for myself where, I write songs every day. And if I want to be done at 3, I can be done at 3 and go watch my kid play lacrosse or whatever.
For a lot of people, obviously not changing, but sort of transitioning a career, again, you're obviously sort of still in that same universe of being a musician, but it's a hard transition for a lot of people to make. At what point in the process of, you sort of realizing that the band was no longer a viable entity, did you realize that writing songs for and with other people was something that you could actually do to sustain yourself?
There are a couple absolute touchstones that I think back to, which is one, Nixon's last album, speaking of labels, not hearing a single, flew me to LA to work with Marty Fredrickson. And that is when I realized that songwriting as a job, as an entity, was a thing. I just didn't even know it. And so meeting Marty, understanding, oh, this guy, this is a thing that people do. The band splintering, I released a solo record and a series of things happened. My solo record, right around the time my solo record came out, a friend of mine, Jarrett from the band Bowling for Soup, was sort of experiencing a little writer's block. He called, come down to Texas and let's write. I ended up getting 5 songs on that particular album. And within the same year, one of the songs on my solo record got heard by an A&R guy creating the first Daughtry record. And Chris Daughtry, and they retooled it, rewrote some stuff on it and released it. So I had a cut with Bowling for Soup and Daughtry around the same time. And that's when I thought, okay, this is a thing that I can do. It's not been easy. It's still a grind every day, but I got lucky. I really did. I had a friend in Bowling for Soup. We had taken them out on one of their first tours. So I don't know. He probably felt like he owed me or something, but just stumbling into a couple of cuts with them, one of which became a top 40 song. And then at the same time, like I said, landing a song on a Daughtry album that ended up selling 6 million records. So those were sort of like key things that sort of were light bulb moments.
So you had a solo record. So you were doing performing on your own. Was it difficult to step away from that and to really just operate almost exclusively behind the scenes?
No, not at all. In fact, I thoroughly enjoyed it. We were in Tulsa at the time, Oklahoma. Moved here 10 years ago, but I had a studio in Tulsa that I loved. I went in every day and just made music, created stuff, did release a couple little, almost vanity projects as a solo artist. And then I really, really embraced that whole, hey, you want to fly me out to San Francisco to sit on a rehearsal room floor with band, this band, and then down to LA to go to SIR and work with another rock and roll band. And I loved it. And again, because of the nature of what I do, sort of, you looked at a pie chart of my cuts that I've had over the years, it's country, pop, rock, probably pretty equal. When I moved to Nashville, it was probably not equal at all, probably 80-20, but it's pretty equal now. And I do believe that is healthy for me personally as a songwriter. I have great friends that sit every day down on Music Row and just try to get a Kenny Chesney hit. That's all they really do. I couldn't do that. I love it that, my discography is Heavy as Hell song on Hailstorm album, ballad on Hailstorm's previous album, Skillet, Anthem, Shine Down, but then Carrie Underwood, Tim McGraw, Blake Shelton. That stuff I think probably serves me well. I guess is the best way to put it, just because I think I would go nuts trying to write the same damn thing.
Was the Carrie Underwood song, was that kind of your entree onto writing country music?
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. They flew me out. We hadn't moved here yet, but we were preparing to move here. And I walked into a room with Carrie. She's from Oklahoma, had actually seen the Nixons play many, many, many years before. And so there was a little icebreaker there, and she's at this point a massive star. And got lucky. I had a lot of advisors and mentors that were saying, hey, when you go into a Nashville songwriting session, don't think you have to write about country stuff. You don't have to write about
your truck.
Yeah, sitting on the river and on the tailgate of a truck, drinking a Budweiser. You don't have to do that. You just, you want to try to, whatever the genre, whatever the artist, write a good song. I mean, that sounds kind of cliche, but to answer your question, that was absolutely an entry into Nashville. I was able to then sort of move in and out of several other rooms and work with other artists, all because of good old Carrie.
How difficult is that transition to being a rock guy for basically all of your career to writing a country song? I mean, you're from Oklahoma. Obviously, there's a big tradition of country and folk music. But is it hard to navigate an entirely different genre like that?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly can be. And I definitely can feel like in some cases I've been in a songwriting room where at any given moment I might feel a little bit out of my depth. Like, wait, what am I doing in here with these dudes? No,
but you're not like writing Kendrick Lamar songs, for example.
You're right. So yeah, don't hire Zac to go try to collaborate with Skrillex. Probably not, but I mean, if you're talking about a tearjerker ballad, that Carrie Underwood's going to sing. The song Sister, which was our biggest hit, was about, missing my sister and relying on the memories to sort of keep, sustain you till the next time you're together, that whole thing. So, and by the way, Carrie said it to me. She said, I love that song you wrote for David Cook. And I love that song that the Nixons had when that I saw you guys play, blah, blah, blah. So in some ways, she probably came to me for a certain thing, if you catch my meaning. You know what I mean? She wasn't saying, hey, manager, get me a song. Let's do a writing session with Zac Maloy to see how it goes, because I bet you he's got some really good ideas about Chevrolet trucks. You know what I mean? She's not really singing that either. She wants to try to sing heartfelt things. And so, yeah, it was it was a transition, but not a giant one.
You mentioned the song Sister. Obviously a very earnest song. I've heard, I listened to some interviews with you, and it's funny that that like most people assume that it was that your sister had died, because like why would anyone just write this earnest of a song about a sibling that's still around that they still miss? Certainly in that era of music, it was a level of earnestness that you weren't really getting from a lot of radio hits at the time. I mean, was it ever hard to kind of be that earnest when everybody around you is too cool for school?
I can tell you that the Nixons were never too cool for school. It was probably something that we should have maybe been a little more cognizant, a little bit more aware, hyper aware of. But because now we were always very much hard on our sleeves, so this was just a thing, like we're writing and wrote a song that's very unabashedly about racism, and we've had another song that's literally the word FOMA, which is a word invented by Kurt Vonnegut, who was my favorite writer, that means lies that people tell themselves to make themselves feel better. And there wasn't a lot of that going on either, in that type of, grunge, post-grunge, 90s rock. I loved Stone Temple Pilots, but I very rarely knew what the hell he was talking about. But I don't care. I mean, Interstate Love Song, give it to me anytime. I got it. And then meanwhile, there were bands that would kind of go down the road. We got the opportunity to tour with Radiohead, and I always thought that he was pretty well until he stopped making sense to a certain extent. He was pretty earnest, like a song like Creep was pretty heartfelt and high and dry. And I loved that stuff. I loved, I got the chance to see, Pearl Jam very, very early, and Jeremy being about a kid that, in a classroom in Texas that he had read about. I appreciated those kind of things. So no, it wasn't hard for us because it was just what we did. And probably being in Oklahoma helped us in some ways. You know what I mean? Like, I wonder if, in a different universe, if the Nixons, emerged out of Seattle or out of Athens, Georgia at a certain time, or out of the, Sunset Strip, I wonder, would we have been a little bit more like looking around going, oh, we better do this. We better be this way. We better be this way. We had nothing in Oklahoma. We had the Chainsaw Kittens and the Flaming Lips, and that was it. And those bands were just weird and cool. And they weren't really like an influence to us, other than I loved them and I still do, and I'm friends with members of each. We were just dudes in Oklahoma. We literally wrote that first album in a garage off Ricky's bedroom in Norman, Oklahoma, with no outside influence at all. Now, once we signed to a label, they definitely weighed in, of course, but to a certain extent, we were pretty insulated, and we were just kind of doing our thing.
The Flaming Lips being an obvious counterexample to this, in that I think Wayne is still in Oklahoma City. But at that point, if you wanted to break into the music industry, you would have moved to like New York or LA. Do you think that there was an advantage from being based out of a place like Oklahoma that was so far away from either coast?
I do. I do, just from the reasons I just alluded to, but also, I got to say, we kind of came out of a scene within the same sort of year or so, give or take. We got signed, a band called the Toadies got signed, Tripping Daisy got signed, Deep Blue Something got signed. All those bands I'm mentioning were from Dallas, and a couple other bands got signed from Dallas. We were almost like from Dallas, Texas by proxy. We were 2.5 hours north is where our home base was, but we really did sort of break out of that scene, and did always stay in Oklahoma. In fact, the two of the other guys are still in Oklahoma. John is in, like I mentioned, in Seether, but he's still based in Oklahoma. And I think it did help us for the reasons I told you, mentioned creatively, but it was also just cool to be, like we were the biggest band to have been signed out of Oklahoma in many years. And man, that city, that state, North Texas, they really embraced us, and sort of like, that was a big deal for us. We could have these labels fly in to see us play a showcase, and it was, a sold out show, of 3,000 people. I've been in experiences where bands are going to get flown to LA to showcase for Mr. Label Guy at the Viper Room at 4 p.m. I mean, that just sucks. There's nothing cool about that. In fact, I'll back up further and say that our first showcase we ever did was CBGB's in New York City, at 6 p.m. before the doors opened, for 2 label execs who passed. Of course they passed. We were all alone on a legendary stage, but an empty room. It was, luckily we got to play CB's to a packed house a couple years later. But yeah, man, our experience being from Oklahoma on many levels was probably, yes, as you put it, hugely beneficial.
As I told you earlier, I'm in New York, and I went to CBGB's a few times before it closed, and I understand why it's historic. It's not really romantic in the same way. It was a shithole, So I imagine that there must have been something kind of depressing about that experience of just playing with essentially 2 people in a room in that kind of rundown club on the Bowery.
I will say this, that you are exactly right. I'll never forget being backstage, being like, where are we, man? This is I am certain that there have been murders and all kinds of shit that's gone down back here. But I will say this, that many years later, up in New York City with my young kids, I don't know if you'll remember this, but there were occasionally, well, New York's just this way in general, but we were Googling things to do, touristy things to do I was going to go around the city with my 2 boys. There was a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame pop-up exhibit in some part of New York City that had a bunch of cool stuff in it, like John Lennon's glasses, but it also had the awning from CBGB's, with what did it say, Fug or whatever. And so, dude, to pose with my 2 young sons next to the awning of this venue that I played many years before was awesome. And yes, very romantic, as you put it, in terms of a rock and roll thing. But no, being in that place on that stage, even when it was packed, we actually opened for Joan Jett there many years later. And it was awesome. It was an awesome, awesome place. But you're right. Almost in theory, more than in actual practicality.
As we said before, they arrived as the band was on its way out. And, you said that they hadn't quite experienced the Nixons thing or the band thing until the reunion. Do you get a sense that they kind of grasp how weird and uniquely cool of a thing that you were able to do was?
Probably not fully. Although my young son is trying to follow in footsteps and do music and already figuring out how hard it is. The other one's smarter. He's doing physics. No, but I think that they probably, seeing those reunion shows, probably did, they probably did sort of get it. I remember talking to my youngest, Jude, and he was just saying, we played this place in Dallas called Trees, and this was our first full show back in 17 years. Sold out show, packed, fans singing every word to pretty much every song. And Jude told me the next day, I remember, it's a feel good moment for a parent, of course, to be like, wow, Dad, I didn't know that. I just didn't know that part of you, that you have whatever, 1,200 people in this room that know, we played one song that we hardly ever played called Gabriel, and people were singing every word to that song. And we were thinking about not even putting that song in the set list. So yeah, I mean, they've been able to see that part of it. And also, by the way, listen, they've always known that their dad's doing something a little bit different, just because of the nature of the way I look, the way I act, my whole life. And I think also, by the way, they've appreciated the songwriter part of it, even more so in later years, as they've both done music. One now is aspiring to do it, in the real world. As
somebody who's seen obviously firsthand how difficult the music industry is, I assume throughout your career, obviously, you've had more success than others, but you've been on all sides of it. Where do you, when your kid wants to get into this thing, how much encouragement do you offer and how much warning do you give them?
Yeah, that's a great That's a great question that I really don't even know if I know the best answer for it. You just kind of do your best in all parts of parenting, but certainly he has a unique perspective as he does enter into music. I didn't. My dad was a civil engineer. My mom was a, stay-at-home mom. They loved music, but there was no frame of reference. Jude has met the Jonas Brothers came over and hung out and ate pizza and jumped on our trampoline, at our house. And they've been in the studio where you would look around and you'd see these two small children, ages, whatever, 8 and 6. And meanwhile, all 4 members of Bowling for Soup have 1,000 tattoos between the 4 of them, so they've been around music and around that world. And so probably that helps a little bit. The other cool thing is that I have to say, and I don't know what part of New York you're in.
Queens, Astoria.
Queens. Okay. Yeah. So being, my wife's small business took her to New York occasionally, such that we were in New York and LA probably 3-4 times a year their whole life. And so, being in New York, even 2 years ago to tour NYU, and then we went to Brooklyn to see a rock band play, and to meet their manager. You know what I mean? Like most kids, that's not happening for most kids to meet, one of the biggest managers in rock and roll, and to have him be saying to Jude, "Here's my cell. Call me when you get to town if you end up coming here." You know what I mean? So there are just certain things that he's got. I will also say that he's also kind of going his own way. Like his brand of music is not necessarily something that I do or do very well. So in some ways, good for him. And I applaud that for any young artist to just, sort of try different shit.
Your own parents, they didn't really have a frame of reference. I think your grandfather was a musician. Is that right?
Yeah. By the time I became aware as a human, he had played, or opened for, Ernest Tubbs and Johnny Cash and huge things, but by the time I, was noticing what he did, he was playing, the 4th of July festival at the park down in small town, but it was still badass. It was still cool as hell. And, I've got, his 1955 Martin D18 guitar got handed down to me. So it's his musical sort of legacy is still something that's very important to me. But he wasn't giving me much advice on how to make it in a loud, sweaty rock and roll band. But yeah, music's in the blood in some way. But yeah, and it was a cool thing to have that there.
Did your parents think it was a crazy thing for you to pursue?
For sure. Yeah. I mean, now I'm a little bit different than a lot of my pals that are singers in rock bands. I actually graduated from college. I got my degree in political science, which I've not used since the last day of class.
Come in handy these days, I think.
Or maybe I have used it and I just don't know it. But yeah. I sort of joke about I was headed to law school. It was like literally was talking about housing. And at the last minute, I just said to my dad, I remember the phone call, I'm going to give this music thing a try. Our running joke is he's like, "So how's that turning out for you 25 years later?" But no, I mean, they were pretty supportive. I mentioned this to someone else the other day that they flew up to New York City to watch their kid play at Madison Square Garden. And there they were in the audience, rock horns in the air with their Nixons t-shirts on. So they have been extremely supportive. But I mean, I'm certain that at the beginning they were kind of like, this is just a phase,
That call, when you're on this path, when you've gone to college and, and obviously if you've gotten into law school, you've got some future ahead of you. Do you remember what it was that really tipped you over the edge, that this was something that you had to give a shot to before, giving up the dream?
I not only do I know exactly what tipped me over the edge, I can tell you exactly what it was. So this is what happened. I kind of lied. Or I gave you a different version of the story, and good for you for digging a little bit, because We got offered a record deal by an independent label that was based in Dallas, Texas, that went bankrupt less than a year and a half later. That's what it took. That's all it took. And in hindsight, it was stupid. I mean, what the hell are you thinking? You know, you're going to base this massive life decision on a little tiny label that's going to release one Nixons EP and then kind of cease to exist, which is exactly what happened. But that's all it took. And then for whatever, you know, fate, luck, the claws were sort of in me, I guess, at that point. And so there was no turning back.
You get one chance. You know, it would have, I don't know that you could have gone to law school and then had a successful music career. Like you're able to make crazy decisions in your, you know, early or mid 20s that you can't later in life.
That's right. That's exactly right. Except when your kids then go to college, you're an empty nester. You can still go be in a rock band, I guess.
Sure, but you have the infrastructure to be in a rock band. And
you're exactly right. You know, those, and by the way, that's the beautiful part of it. You know, that's the beautiful part of my kid that I just talked about, and my older kid who's, you know, going down a completely different road. But it's super exciting to hear him talking about, yeah, I just applied for an internship with this company that makes these balls that go into rooms that take pictures for 360. I mean, I just stopped listening to the physics major halfway through most conversations, but it's cool, right? These are young dudes that are right there, right at the beginning, and it's cool. It's fun to watch, and it you know, it was what it was. Again, it was a label that really, if I would have known better, I wouldn't have done it. But you said it. It's the one little thing that tipped the scale.
After you have the conversation with your band members, and you know, after everybody's kind of getting along, do you regret not having picked up the phone sooner?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you know, you can't. You live in that, you know, you can't sort of like, but certainly, man, I mean, listen, you know, on multi levels, and it's not, I know it's not all about money, but for years, I do songwriting sessions occasionally with Emerson Hart from Tonic and Kevin Griffin from Better Than Ezra. We're friends and like love their families and all that stuff. Both of them were like, what are you doing? Why are you the Nixons not playing at least a couple shows a year? It's just there. It's just right there for go make a little bit of money, have a little bit of fun, you know, re-engage those fans that wonder what ever happened to the Nixons. Now, I will say this, that for me personally, and I can't speak for the other guys, but for me personally, I mentioned to you that we were asked to do shows, you know, starting probably 5 years after we went away. And it was just a hard no for many, many years, until it was like, but you know what? I'm going to talk to, you know, Jesse. Okay. Good talk. I'm going to go talk to John. Good talk. And then go talk to Ricky, which was the hardest one, which was the one that was it was the most embittered, you know, back in when we split. And he probably is still bitter about some of the things that went down, but none of us are really hanging on to that anymore, because why would we? I mean, it is what it is, and it's just now, it's just a lot of fun. But I do regret it only because we would have had the chance to do more shows, and maybe we'd be on EP number 2 or full length album number 2 or whatever. We've only released 5 new songs, 6. The vinyl has a bonus track on it. And that's kind of like, you know, on some levels, that's kind of slacking. I mean, I'm a damn songwriter, for God's sakes. We should have more than 5, 6 songs. But again, it is what it is. And I'm proud of those songs and proud of the release. And so we're just sort of powering through now.
Your timing sucks. When it comes to like having momentum for a reunion, I don't know if you could have picked worse timing. You know, obviously like the inability to actually like play together puts a big damper on things. But do you get the sense that the band is just kind of, it's just together now? You know, I mean, is it just a thing? You guys will get back together and tour and continue to play and release records from now on?
Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. And, you know, we're, I think probably our girl that introduced us mentioned we're doing this live stream February 19th that I would encourage people to check out, because, you know, this is, gosh, it never sounds good to talk about yourself like this, but John's a badass drummer. He's just a great drummer. Ricky and Jesse have only gotten better at their particular things. I've tried to work hard to build the vocal cords back up, and it's going to be a great show. It's going to be a couple songs that we hadn't played, that we did not play in the reunion shows previously. So literally 2 songs that have not been played in 20 years. And then, the songs that people know, along with some little interviews in between. And I would encourage people to watch it because yeah, we are going to be around with it. I mean, because why not? Because the thing is that we get, you get random phone calls, and again, not so much now, but a friend in another band from the 90s is going to do a tour later in the year, and just out of the blue, direct message on Instagram, here's my cell, called him, come and do these dates with us. And we're going to do it if the dates end up happening. And so, yeah, to answer your question, why not? Why not just have it there? And here's the worst that can happen. And this has happened, that people have said, hey, can you come play this festival in upstate New York? And we couldn't. We just couldn't, because Seether was in the studio recording their latest album, or whatever the case was. So yeah, it's always going to be there until it, it's not fun anymore, or I can't physically get on stage, I guess.